Hello, welcome to Quackalope. Thank you for being here. It is currently 4:30 a.m. on Tuesday night, and I just finished going through the ARCS rulebook for the second time, going through the errata for said rulebook, and playing 2 full games of, well, base game ARCS, without lore and without leaders included, as you, the community, recommended, and you were absolutely right. I would not have been prepared, equipped, or even enjoyed this game if I'd tried to dive into, well, lore and leaders, let alone the expansion and the big box. And my normal instinct is to want to jump directly into a campaign-style adventure game full of asymmetry and lots of building blocks, but holy cow, ARCS is in a world of its own, both when it comes to game design, the experience of play, and the complexity sitting in front of you on the table. Now, this is a first impressions review style video talking about a game that I've played once, 4 players, once, 2 players, and I did poll and get feedback from the 3 other people that I played with just tonight, to get a sense of where their rankings are, what their highs and lows were. And so in this video, I'm going to break down 5 big good points in ARCS, 5 big negative points in ARCS, the good, the bad, the beautiful, and, well, honestly, the ugly. And don't worry, BGG is absolutely going to love this video as well, because, well, I guess I've actually played the game this time, so maybe now I have a right to talk about it. So, ARCS. For those of you that have no idea what this game is, I'll give you my little 30-second pitch, but I have a lot of content coming out on this game. I mean, I can sit here right now and tell you that I will absolutely be getting 6 or so off-camera plays done, likely this week, and then recording a 3-part campaign in the full Quackalope style. That means card overlays and commentary and behind-the-scenes cameras and an incredible studio space to film it in. So if you're excited about this game and you're ready for guided content, gameplay content, the stuff that we make here, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button and let us know what you're looking for. ARCS. The 30-second pitch on ARCS is that this is going to be a race-to-win, victory point-driven game that combines area control with trick-taking card mechanics. Now, a lot of people won't be familiar with what trick-taking is as a genre. The core concept is that you'll have a sequence of cards that'll have some type of number and some type of color. Trick-taking involves you playing down a card that matches but then trumps those other cards or that leading card that's been played. So if I played the 5 red, you would then want to be able to put down a card that is higher than that card number in the same matching color as that card number. Many times games iterate on this by having you follow the last person who played or having you take special actions and abilities depending on what card you were able to put down. In ARCS, they change the script a little bit, with the player who has initiative leading the cards, setting the parameters for what that round, that single set of actions every player will take, is going to be like. And then every other player has 3 options they can do. They can play a card down that has the same color, is a higher number than that initiative card, that first card that was played, and they get the actions. They get the number of pips and the actions associated with the 4 different types of cards in the game. However, they could also play down a card of a different color, getting 1 action of their color, or play a card face down, getting 1 action of whatever that leading card was. So the trick-taking here is smart, and it's hard in a lot of weird, interesting ways, because the actions that are associated with the tricks that you're taking combine with the resources that you have, the special asymmetric abilities that you've been able to draft, and whatever positioning's happening here on the board. I mean, these little cards are doing a lot. Let me just show you one of them. I keep reaching out there to grab one. It's almost as if I should just leave a few here on the table for you to see. These cards not only have a range of, and I'm looking for one more color. These cards not only have a range of abilities, there's a blue, just destroying the set in front of me. They not only have a range of abilities associated with the color that's been played, they also have a power level associated with the number and the number of pips. The lower number cards are going to have more actions that you can take associated with them. They have specific abilities tied to them, like here, the construction card, you can build or repair, aggression, you can battle, move, or secure, administration, you can tax, repair, or influence, and mobilization, you can move or influence. So, multiple actions, but each one is limited to a specific type of card that you're playing and limited to the amount of actions that you can take on that card. The more powerful cards, the cards that you can typically play after someone else has led the initiative, are going to typically give you less abilities, less actions that you can actually take. On top of that, the bottom of these cards here are going to have the type of scoring they could trigger, the ambitions track. I told you that this was a race to win, and in many ways that's the case. Similar to Root in a mechanics system, you have variable ways of scoring points, and you're going to be trying to trigger endgame by crossing a threshold. The person at the end of the game, whoever triggers endgame, the person at the end of the game who has the most points will be the victor. You're going to be scoring, though, instead of your own asymmetric player boards, off of this ambitions track. And this ambition track relates to pretty much everything you're doing on the game board. Tycoon is 2 different types of resources you want to collect. Tyrant is how many units you've captured, not from battling, but instead from occupying and enslaving, I suppose, the alien life forms on whatever planet your compatriots are at. Warlord is going to be from blowing those alien life forms up. Keeper is going to be by having these relic icons, and Empath is going to be having the Scion, or the psychic icons, either on your cards or on the people that you've recruited and the resources that you have on the table. So you have a race to win engine. You have an area control space opera happening here in the center where you're establishing outposts, gathering resources, spreading across this map, and fighting tooth and nail to try to win. All driven by this extremely innovative, extremely interesting trick-taking card system. I mean, you don't have your own unique deck of tricks either. You have this shuffled deck of cards and you're drawing up, and so the math and the equation that you get and the abilities that you get and what everyone else has around the table is this weighty process of trying to deduce and trying to read the room and trying to follow and grab initiative exactly when you need it. The experience of playing ARCs is the experience of learning a game. When you play this for the first time, you're going to spend almost, if not the entirety of the game, just trying to figure it out. In fact, the second time I played it, the 2-player variation, again, because of the dynamic between 4 and 2 players, I was sitting here trying to balance and figure out and read the board. I went straight for scoring, and that did well for me, but there's so much more here that I haven't really been able to sink my teeth into, and I don't really quite yet fully comprehend. I'm a bit concerned that as I learn this base game more and more, it becomes simpler, becomes more straightforward. Yeah, of course, I'm going to go for scoring objectives. Or, yeah, there's cards out here in the marketplace that I want to add to my tableau, or I can go rip them out of my enemy's cold, dead fingers. I will keep an eye on the cards that are being played, the tricks, and kind of understanding who's played what and what's already popped out here onto the board, and there'll be a sequential process of how you approach the game. One of my concerns with base games arcs right now is that as I get deeper into it, the complexity will pull back, and the simplicity of the game design and game engine will actually reveal itself more and more. I don't know if that's good or bad. I will say this, though. Leader Games has already, in my opinion, acknowledged and corrected for that very issue. You have leader cards that you can add in that add a wide variety of setup conditions, special powers and abilities, and starting resources or conditions for scoring that completely change the game. Not only that, but you'll grab the lore cards and you'll be able to draft those as well. We haven't integrated these into our gameplay yet because base game's confusing enough as it is. But as I was reading through these and getting a sense of exactly how they operate, I can see how this asymmetry will start transforming the way you approach the game. And while the puzzle, the core architecture of Arcs, is going to be fairly straightforward, depending on what cards you have, you kind of have an order or operation of play that you need to follow. And depending on what is being triggered or how you're able to trigger things, you sort of go for victory points. You focus on that. There's not really too much else you need to do. But depending on the puzzle I've been given from drafting these cards, that's going to really change the way that I have to approach the game and change the way that I'm going to be able to acquire victory points. On top of that, the massive big box expansion that all of you told me don't dive into first, that's just going to add an entire new mess to the game engine, the game system. I believe it operates similar to how Oath did, where like the game evolves as you play, the story and the architecture and the cards change and transform, and then you can reset it back to zero, but you play it through 3 full years of 3 to 5 chapters each, so a dedicated 6 to 8 hour game session, and I can only imagine that the narrative progression and the asymmetry only continues to diversify as the game gets deeper and deeper. So far, despite my apprehensions and my skepticism around Arcs, I really like this game. I think the game design is clean and elegant. I think it is chaotic, and I can 100% see where some other reviewers are going to like this in a way that I might not relate to. I mean, the comparisons to Twilight Imperium and Cosmic Encounter have already started echoing through the stratosphere of the board game industry, and I think in many ways I have to agree with them. I mean, the Twilight Imperium aspects of this are there. It's not as complex, it's not as overreaching, but the fact that you can sit down and you can play through a giant narrative campaign, and the fact that you're sitting here balancing this complex asymmetry, this craft and resource management and scoring objectives, and the thing that I think, well, some reviewers are going to enjoy in a way that I probably won't, the fact that this game leaves open the opportunity for tons of above-board conversation, wheeling and dealing, personal debts, and players ganging up against the leader. It almost requires it in some ways. Well, this could become more of a social, experiential game than a mechanics-first driven game. And that's where I think a lot of people are actually going to fall off of this. The wildness, the variance, and the randomness in opportunity, in dice rolling, in scoring, and in the cards that you draw up is pretty steep. And if you're not wheeling and dealing, if you're not self-balancing the game as a set of players, you're going to run into a situation where the Euro side, the gamer that just wants it to be a good, perfect math problem, the root player in you that wants an asymmetric puzzle but doesn't want too much chaos introduced into their board game, I don't think Arcs is going to work. I think it's too wild. I think it's too open, and I think it requires the players to all have a vast, deep experience with the game in a way that I would even argue Root doesn't quite require. Yeah, in Root, you want to be able to play all 4 or all 6 or all 12 factions, so you understand how they score and how they operate, but if you focus on your faction, you focus on your faction well, you can have a good game. By the end of both of our games, everyone around the table was still, for the most part, learning how to play. Still figuring out the fiddly little details and asking corrections and nuanced questions around the rules, some of which weren't answered in the rulebook and were answered here in the errata. And I took notes on all of that, and I wrote all that down, and as I was going back and parsing through things, I realized just how open-ended the rulebook leaves many aspects of this game, to the point where even in the back of the rules, it talks about player agency. It talks about reworking turns, as long as you haven't revealed new information. It opens the door for conversations, wheeling and dealing, without, of course, revealing private information or binding ties, but it's encouraging the players to take a role in the narrative and experiential aspects of play. So, let's talk about my 2 gameplays specifically, and then the best and the worst elements of Arcs, and then I've got a few other videos I'm going to film. I'm already ready to go on them. I've been taking notes all evening, so I've got a few lists to run through. So, in our 4-player game, we took about 30 to 45 minutes to do the initial run-through and teach, the general setup and breakdown. Before that, I'd spend about an hour reading through the rulebook myself, setting up the game and getting a sense of how the operational play worked. After about 30 minutes of teaching, we started running through the game, and that first round or two was definitely a teaching round or two. We had crazy things happen where people zoomed in and destroyed a city right off the bat to see what happens when you revolt, but there was no one on a card over here in order for them to claim, so they ended up just penalizing themselves for the duration of the game as opposed to getting a strong benefit for destroying a city. I mean, it seems like you should go rip things apart, but that first couple rounds was much more of a learning game than anything else. By about midway through the game, we were all pretty well up and running, playing cards, trying to go for victory points, and figuring out the conditions necessary to score. But the end points did not align with a balanced, well-informed table or well-informed game. The scores ended at 32, 15, 5, and 4. A very distant and steep contrast between those that were focusing on this as more of a build your tableau, establish your colonies, control your space engine, as opposed to a ambition-driven, victory point scoring focused game, a race-to-win game engine. It definitely incentivized and benefited players who were familiar with trick-taking already and could think a little bit ahead in how they were approaching and how they were playing out cards in order to do multiple actions, like taking those pips possible, but also making sure they had initiative at the right time in order to trigger the ambition that they wanted so that it would score. As far as the players, everyone across the board gave it a 7 out of 10. Not a perfect game, not their favorite game of all time, not a game that they even fully understood, but one that they were all interested in playing again, and one that all of them said has a likelihood of improving with multiple plays. The deeper they get into it, the more likely my group was to enjoy this. We did almost no above-board wheeling and dealing other than gentle complaints about rolling dice and attacking our ships. We were very focused on learning the game and the gameplay structure. I don't know that wheeling and dealing would enhance our personal gaming experience, but I'm not opposed to trying it, especially when I get the right group of friends around me. We all know the game very well, and we're doing something like the campaign game or the asymmetric game, where wheeling and dealing and cutting corners in order to benefit other players, to balance the game and self-regulate those scores might be essential and might be important. I mean, the fact that our final scores were so steeply different is concerning for me. I don't love walking into a game and watching one player blow everyone else out of the water. I think for the players that didn't score so well, it can be a little bit anticlimactic, it can be a little bit discouraging for them coming back to the game table, and it shows some type of disconnect between what the game's telling or instructing players to do and what, of course, the whole point of the game or the whole objective or ambition of the game is. Now, that could have been on me. That could have had something to do with the teach and the overview and how much emphasis I put on how things score and the focus on that, but I really think we all had a pretty good understanding of the game overall, and by the end of it, we all had a good time. So keep that in mind. Most people said they were not ready. Everyone across the board said they were not ready for more content. That's why I followed up with a 2-player, still without introducing leaders or lore. I myself wasn't ready for new content. I wasn't ready to add in asymmetry. I was still figuring out the puzzle of the game and wanted to figure out the balance between 2 players versus 4 full players. I do like 4 players quite a lot because it has the 1s and the 7 cards in. The 1s, of course, cannot label ambitions, but they have a lot of resources. And the 7s always trump, so you're able to wheel and deal and steal initiative a little bit more effectively. The game feels like it was designed for those 4 players in mind, and yet 2 players functioned really, really well. I enjoyed 2 players quite a lot, actually, and I'm really excited to teach Shira this. I'm really excited to sit down with West and have a chance to run through the 2-player puzzle of this game more. 2 players felt more tactical, more chess-like, more strategic, where 4 players felt like anything could happen across the board, and you're just kind of holding on by the reins and seeing if you can carry yourself across that finish line. In my 2-player game, the scores, however, did not improve. I scored 35 points, closing the game out in the 3rd chapter. By the way, Game 4 also closed out in the 3rd chapter as well. And my opponent scored 2 points. Game took about an hour and a half to run with 2 players, and we had a good time. We really did. It was a fantastic experience playing 2 players. But again, the difference in scoring and scoring objectives, the difference in how people were approaching this game definitely shone through. I mean, that is a wild divide. And maybe it was because we weren't self-balancing well enough, or it could just be because the game engine of ARCS rewards certain playstyles or rewards heavy scoring. I was able to get all of my cities out onto the board, so I was scoring at some times. In the last round, in the last round in Chapter 3, I think I ended up choosing the 2 ambitions that we scored and scoring a collective 22 points or so for them. And so we're in a position where one really good round, drove endgame and also drove victory. I don't know that I love that. I don't know that I hate it. It feels very similar to the Corvid conspiracy, where you have this engine that if you get it up and running with your hidden tokens across the board, you can suddenly score 10, 15 points without anyone realizing just how close to victory you were because you were so far behind. I think my opponent underestimated how close I was to winning because they weren't so focused on what I would actually end up scoring. They were more focused on building their engine for the later stages and the later chapters of the game. Again, things that you can learn, stuff that you can refine, but if I'm sitting down to play this for the first time or teaching this to someone who's played it once or twice already, I don't want to see those numbers blown out of the water so drastically. I want the game to be, in and of itself in some ways, balanced and competitive. And both in the 4-player game and the 2-player game, I didn't see that as evident. And by the way, my opponent in the 2-player game had just finished the 4-player game as well, so we were both just as familiar with the game as, well, anyone else sitting there at the table. I can compare this over to other games, other Euro-style games and games that I've played that rope that score in a little bit tighter, have maybe guardrails up a little bit higher. It's not necessary, but I think for a game that's presenting itself as an accessible addition to this hobby space, it does present some challenges. Okay, the best, the worst, our thoughts, where we're going from here. I mean, you already know, we're going to produce a ton of content on this. I'm very excited about this. I'm going to be keeping it in my collection until I've at least played through the expansion once entirely, and then we'll read the verdict. We'll read the room. I'm wondering if this sticks around as a base game only. I'm wondering if this sticks around as something that I play, but I play it kind of like Twilight Imperium, where I have the right group and I get the 3 full narrative story arcs out and onto the table. I'm not sure where it lands. I can't see myself teaching this to many players often, like many of the other games that I have that play in that 4-player count range. It's competing with too many games there, but as a 2-player head-to-head puzzle, I really can see this hitting the table quite a bit if the other player knows it and enjoys it. Because then it just comes down to the various different strategies you have, how you're reading your opponent, and the depth in play that you can get as you explore the game. So, the best things, the 5 best things about ARCS. 1, wide open strategies. There are a lot of different ways to go for victory here, and all of them are kind of open. If you get wiped out or annihilated on the board, there's other ways to wiggle your way back, to score, to produce resources. Really, there's not catch-up mechanics necessarily, but there's multiple levers and game engines you can pull at any stage in this game in order to try and score as much as possible. And I don't think you're ever out of the game. However, if you can't convince other players to help you along and leave you alone a little bit, you can certainly be beat down to the degree that you're not able to get up before the game closes and those barn doors shut. But the wide open scoring strategies, the way that you can be, ripped off of half the board and still have pathways back and feel like you have pathways worth exploring, really makes this a standout kind of open world, open box experience. It's fast playing. After the teach, we were able to get this up and running fairly quickly, and I never felt like I was sitting and waiting for too long. In fact, I might have been taking the longest turns at the table. Granted, I am and was on Adderall at the time, so I was really thinking through my actions. That might have contributed to my win as well. You know, you get that little ADD bug out of your head, and then suddenly you're an expert board gamer. However, I don't think anyone was getting impatient or feeling like the AP was prolonged. There are moments where there's a lot of tokens and a lot of stuff that you can do. Sure, if you have a really AP-driven player, things can slow down a lot, I am sure, but it wasn't really an issue for us. 3, broken combos. I love broken combos. Remember, this is still the list of things that I think are really good here, and I absolutely enjoyed coming across some of these cards where I was adding them to my tableau and the combinations were just magical. For instance, I had one that allowed me to declare an ambition after playing a card if it hadn't already been declared. So if I'm not first in initiative, I could still use my cards to claim ambitions, which is great because I was driving some scoring, and driving the scoring engine is the way that you win arcs. But on top of that, I had another card that then allowed me to trigger extra benefits depending on what ambition I had declared. So one of them allowed me to not cover up my number if I declared that to start with. So if I was ever leading a card, I had initiative, I would utilize that. Another one was able to give me kickbacks or something like that, depending on what I played out. So there was a lot of flexibility. One allowed me to look at another player's hand and take or swap a card with them from my own hand after I declared an ambition. So pairing that means every turn I could just choose an ambition I wanted, meaning I'm driving the scoring engine, and swap a card with another player, giving me insight into everything they have in their hand and allowing me to substitute something out, giving me another card that could potentially grab me a new ambition scoring modifier. It was a broken combo. And yeah, other people could have beat me up and stolen it from me, and there's ways to mitigate that brokenness in the game, but just discovering that, just finding those little things that you can press, those little buttons that freak people out enough they want to come after you, is something that I love in board games. Moving down to number 4, I think the trick-taking in this game, and the way that it's combining trick-taking with this area control, this build out your zones, grow your fleet, grow your ships, fight across the battlefield, it feels really innovative to me. Please let me know if I'm overlooking some classic games out there that I haven't played. I've played quite a few trick-taking games, but I'll be honest, it's not my favorite genre out there, so I'm not always hunting for them. But I don't know of a lot of games that utilize trick-taking in a bigger box experience like this, and specifically utilize trick-taking in the way that Arcs does. It feels extremely fresh. It feels extremely different from other area control games that I've played, other games that require hand management or have some form of drafting or asymmetric builds or tableau building. Arcs feels different from all of those because the way that you get a hand of cards and you have to weigh and wear out and figure out exactly what order you want to play them in, and then you have to respond to other players as they fuddle all your plans. And then finally, there is so much to explore. I'm actually really excited about these leader cards. I'm really excited about these lore cards, and I'm insanely excited, even though I'm completely unprepared, completely not ready to play it. I'm very, very excited about the big box expansion. I'm hoping I get it to the table sometime in the next week or two. I can't wait to see what else they have in store. I mean, if this turns into this epic galactic exploration game that I want so desperately, I'm in. I think I would be absolutely sold. Is it going to be in my top 10 or top 20 of all time? I don't know about that, but it certainly might be on a 2-player top 10 or top 20 list. And it might be, hear me out, depending on how good that campaign is, it might be competitive and unique enough to get on to a larger campaign board game list. I'm compelled, I'm excited, I'm intrigued. I am still skeptical. I want to see how I feel 10 and 15 plays deep, but for now, Arcs has my attention, and like many of the other content creators and reviewers out there, I think it has my attention for a very fair and very good reason, even though I think there's going to be a lot of people that buy this based on the hype and bounce off of it hard. So let's talk about those 5 elements, those 5 things that I think are just bad about this game, and these were contributed by the other 3 players I had at the table as well. So, the thing that 2 out of 4 of the players at the table said is that they really didn't like the dice. They didn't feel like the dice were balanced. They had a little bit of trouble understanding them initially, and then when it came to fighting and rolling, which is a big, critical part of this game, they just didn't feel like they were effective. They didn't feel like they played a role. I get it. Dice are dice, right? They can have big wins, they can have epic fails, and ARCS gives you this unique combination of choosing and drafting the type and style of dice that you want to use. But I found a lot of our players were defaulting by the end of the game back to these blue dice because they just got tired of losing their own ships and destroying their own fleets in a barrage to try to steal resources and annihilate other players. The red dice are heavy hitting but risky. You'll be able to wipe out other fleets, but you also might deal a lot of damage back to yourself. The orange or yellowish dice, the orange dice, are going to be focused on stealing from other players, getting their resources, getting their recruits, and they also have damage associated with them as well, so they're a little bit riskier to play. And the blue dice are safe. A 50-50 roll, flip of a coin, you might hit them, you might not hit them, but you're not hurting yourself in the process. I don't love the dice. I don't hate the dice. I think a lot of people are really going to either be thrilled by the introduction of these dice and the way that you can choose and mix and decide exactly what type and how many you want to integrate into your roll, how risky you want to make a roll. And there's going to be a lot of people that find them confusing, find them frustrating, and default to always using the same sequence or the same combination of dice, and they'll just completely whiff past that part of the game because it doesn't always feel fair, and it really can throw off and ruin a focused strategy. And because these strategies can lead to things like 10, 12, 22-point swings, it can matter a lot. If you're counting on victory in this area, if you're counting on removing some fleets and not doing damage to your own, or you just need some of these attacks to go well, or at least go well enough for you to get an extra piece or two in your reserves, or control a planet, or open up a place to build out a city onto the board, you might be left in the wings. And because of how swingy these points are, being left in the wings on a dice roll feels really bad. Moving on down, we have the thing that one of our players said that they were frustrated by is the fact that raids on the board can't be prevented or stopped. There's not a lot of mitigation when it comes to the dice rolls. I mean, this is a attack first game, a lead with your heavy hand, a bring your sword to the after party style board game. And you can respawn ships quickly, you can get cities out there pretty fast, and you're never completely out of the game. But I watched as one player just swept through and more or less took one of the other players off the board in just a series of quick turns. And that wasn't great. And there was almost nothing they could do to mitigate it. I mean, they had their cards stolen and their resources were gone, and all they had left was a little hand of cards and a few puny ships on the board, and they're trying to come back from nothing. That is also the player that said they felt hopeful and felt like there was a lot of opportunity to explore various different scoring pathways. And it was also the player that scored 5 points in our 4-player game. So you take it as you will. I mean, everyone, I guess, is entitled to their opinion, but I think they were knocked out. I think they were kneecapped pretty early, and I don't think there was a lot they could do to prevent that because it happened so early in the game and it happened so quickly. Number 3, balanced by the players. I've already hit on this quite a bit, so I'm not going to harp on it too much more, but ARCS, like a lot of leader games and Cole Worley games, is a game that is focused on players setting the initiative, players knowing how cards score and what powerful combinations are, and understanding the asymmetry between how players are shifting across the board, and reading the room enough that they self-balance the game as they play. Because if I let them get too far ahead of me, or we let them get too far ahead of us, suddenly we're not in contention for victory anymore. And I think in a game like Root, where victory point scoring is slow, it's a progressive thing. It doesn't happen at the end of a big chapter, but instead it's 1 or 2 points every round. You continue stepping up that fortress. It works pretty well because you learn the table, you get a sense of the room, and you learn how to pull people down or shift them, or they get a little bit too far ahead, and you start just punching them in the face until they ultimately lose and someone else wins because you focused all your energy on attacking the vagabond, as you should every time. But here in ARCS, we only had 3 scoring rounds between when both games started and both games ended. And so it's not a slow, progressive scoring system. It's a big, cataclysmic, and sometimes detrimental scoring system. And I don't know if shifting these victory point tracks up would make that better. I don't know if scoring a little bit more often or having smaller point scales but some asymmetry in the way that we actually collect and score, which might be introduced with the leader cards, will change that equation. All I know is that it felt like it went quick, and both games felt the same in that regard. It didn't seem like the balance that players at the table needed to introduce into the game was easy to understand and more so easy to achieve. Moving on down to number 4. It's complex in a really simple way. Arcs is confusing. We had a lot of little tiny nuanced rules questions. I mean, I have a list of about 15 rules that I think we missed through the course of our first 2 games, and we had to double check in the rule book, sometimes look up on BGG, and other people have been asking questions around these. But these aren't complex rules. These are just odd, open-ended things that exist, like how and when do you resort your tokens on your board? Yeah, there's an answer for that, but it wasn't obvious when we were playing it. Or if you're stealing from another player, can you steal one of the resources and throw it away? Because you don't have room on your own board to collect more, but you also have the ability to take from them. Well, it seems that there's maybe an answer that you can do that, and maybe an answer that you can't. We don't have that question resolved yet. The trick-taking is simple, right? You just play a card of a higher order or take 1 or 2 actions per round. And yet the sequencing necessary is really complex. You need to be able to look at 3 or 4 cards and have a sense of what's here at the table and possibly even be memorizing what's already been played out onto the game board in order to do as good as possible. It's odd in that regard. There's not a lot of actions to take. There's not a lot of resources you can grab. And yet, with the mixture of cards that you introduce and the variable ways that you are able to drive the engine and score, the way that every card has 3, 4, or 5 different things it could be used for, and different times in which it should be used or would be preferable to have used it, Arcs gets really, really complicated really, really quickly. And finally, my 2 biggest complaints. Some of you are going to completely disagree with one of these. The lack of lore. I like the little bit of flavor text that we have in Root. I like the little top-of-the-line pips about who we are and why we're fighting. And every time I play Root, I venture into that story. The Eerie Dynasty, the mighty controllers of the forest, this one great nation that's reduced to a single vestige, a single nest up on the high elm tree. The Marquis the Cat, that's spreading over and chopping down and creating infrastructure. The Corvid Conspiracy, that's sneaking silently through the forests, hiding and poofing back and forth, jumping into the eerie nests, and sometimes leaving a little present for them to discover. I love the way that through subtle art, gameplay, and lore, Leader Games established and built a world for me to explore. Arcs, at this point, after 2 games, and I'm a lore-first gamer, so you'd think I'd have a narrative story to tell, I have no narrative story from either of my gameplays. Yeah, I recognized some cute creatures, and I read their names as I drafted them, but I don't know who my faction is, and I don't really know what we did, and there's no strong difference between my motivations on the board or in any other player's motivations on the board. The ambition track doesn't inherently tell me or introduce to me what it is I'm doing. I get it. I'm taking people captive to, I don't know, be a tyrant. I'm attacking nations to be a warlord. But none of it imbued me in the game. None of it enriched the game experience. The mechanics engine was the thing I was focused on, and that's fine. But with the beautiful artwork and the narrative opportunity that Leader Games has with a lot of their storytelling, I do feel right now in base game Arcs, the lore and the narrative is falling flat for me. And I wish it wasn't. And the second other criticism that I have that, again, some of you might not agree with, is the fact that memorization in this game is arguably an important part of it. It's a trick-taking game where players are going to be revealing cards as they play them, and the more information you have, yeah, there's always going to be some that aren't in cycle, but the more information you have, the better you're going to be able to read and take actions in your own hand. And I'm not a trick-taking gamer. With my ADHD and dyslexia combination, working memory is not something I have a lot of. So if I'm focused on what my next few actions will be, I don't have extra memory slots to remember that a 5 red's been played and a 3 blue, and I have the 4 blue, but I haven't seen the 6, so there's a likelihood that some other player has it, or it's in the deck pile, and the thinner the cards get, the more you have to balance. I can remember a few of them, and I tried to pay attention, but memorization in this game is going to be a thing that either makes or breaks the in-depth game experience for many players. If you are focused and remembering what people have put out on the table, you're just going to do better. And if you're not focused and not remembering what people have put out on the table, you're going to miss out. And the game recommends having 2 separate stacks of cards, a face-down stack and a face-up stack for competitive play, and it might slow down the game progress a little bit, but it'll give you a little bit more information as the game moves forward, and I totally hear them. But at the end of the day, I still have to remember what might be in that face-down stack, or what I put into that face-down stack. I still have to actively remember what other players have played, because I can't just pick up the deck of cards and start cycling through them. It's a puzzle side that some people are really going to adapt to, and they're going to easily integrate in with and enjoy a lot, and other people are not going to find that fun at all. So, that's where we are. That is my first impressions of ARX. I know, this is a long video, but I wanted to sit and talk about it. I had a lot of things to go through. I have a lot of thoughts about this game. I am not sure where this will land for me. I think I agree with my game group at the moment. 7.5 is where it currently ranks, but it's a very mixed ranking system. I think this could go up if mixing in asymmetry and having a group of well-informed 5 or 6 plays deep gamers at the table, if that self-regulates, self-balances, this game could easily get up to an 8 or a 9 on the Richter scale. And at the same time, the base game, if I'm 5 or 6 games deep and still working through the same general puzzle and playing with the same set of cards and never really introducing asymmetry because the players around the table just haven't learned it or haven't played it enough, because I'm always introducing it to new gamers at my house, I think the base game actually might drop down to like a 5.5 or a 6. It might be good, fun, okay, an experience to say the least, but not a game that I'm readily grabbing off the shelf. I think the most likely place where this ends up is that big box, expansion-based story campaign that allows the adventure of ARX to come to the forefront and makes it so you don't mind and you're not bothered with some of the intricacies of learning the game for the first time. This has not been the most fun game I've played for the first time. I mean, my first impressions of this, the first few plays that I've had, have left me curious. They've left me wanting. They've left me excited to come back. But I didn't end going, wow, that was beautiful, or amazing, or mind-blowing. I left going, oh, all right, well, that's an interesting rule, and I'd like to try to play again so I could get it more right, or so that I could utilize it more effectively, and so I could discover more content. There you have it. Let me know, what are your initial thoughts on ARX? Did you make it to this point in the video, and are you excited about the other content we have coming down the line? Like I already said, I'll have at least 3, if not more, gameplays coming out. I have people coming to visit, and I'm scheduling them. I have the errata rulebook that I'm going to go through. I'm going to be doing the 10 rules you might miss, like we often do here. I'm going to be breaking down the 2-player rules of the game and some strategy and tips and tricks that I've experienced in that course of play. I have the 10 things we wish we would have known before playing, and a strategy guide on the horizon, along with hopefully a how to play and a quick start guide and all the other faction breakdowns and nonsense that you could include. I'm enjoying this game. I'm excited to dive into it, and even if it doesn't stick around, I'm going to have a darn good time exploring, creating, and putting out some content for you all to consume. Whatever the case, though, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing. Don't do that. Whatever it is you just thought of, that's not the important. Do the opposite of that. We'll see you next time.